breaking news, the Xbox CEO, Asha Sharma, has now been appointed to a newly created role as an advisor in something called a task force within the Federal Reserve that specializes in focusing on productivity and jobs. Here's a quote that gives you a bit of an idea as to what that role may entail. The Federal Reserve's commitment to price stability and maximum employment is unwavering, as is our resolve to pursue our mandate with rigor. Each task force will carefully consider whether policymakers' means and methods, analytical tools, and policy approaches can be improved upon. And I am honored that the best minds from a range of disciplines have agreed to work with us and sharpen the performance as an institution. So basically what that's saying, of course, is that her task is going to be to optimize job productivity within America, right? In short. And of course, a big part of this controversy is that earlier this year, Microsoft approved 2,273 foreign H-1B visa employees. And so I think, there's so many different angles we can discuss this topic in, but first thing I want to say about this is the obvious elephant in the room, or the point that needs to be addressed, is that there is a pattern throughout society, specifically in the West now in 2026, where people of Asha Sharma's demographic, they get into positions where they have say on who they choose to hire, and they have a strong bias towards people who come from India, right? They're fellow countrymen. Now, I know what a lot of people are going to say in an attempt to refute what I'm saying is they're going to say, well, Asha Sharma is born in America, so that isn't a fair comparison because she's American, whereas you're describing H-1B workers who are in India. But if we're all being honest, we know that Indians work as a collective. They tend to be, on average, more exclusionary and have a stronger in-group preference than the equivalent Westerner in America or in Canada or in Australia. In America, Canada, and Australia, it isn't to say that they don't have somewhat of an in-group preference, but there have been studies, and Europeans' in-group preference is much lower relative to other race groups. It tends to be that Jews and Indians have a very strong in-group preference. And the reason why this is obviously problematic, and it's disappointing and frustrating that we're seeing this pattern of Xbox laying off a boatload of workers, and then not much later, a notable portion or a significant amount of H-1B workers being approved. In this instance, we're talking about 2,273. It's saddening because so many people are graduating from Western universities, and when they come out of school, they're struggling to find work, and then they'll go and look in a department, whether that department is at a tech company, whether that department's at a bank, whether that department could even simply be, in Canada's case, a Tim Hortons or a Subway, or, in America's case, you could go to towns in Texas that used to be diverse, and now they're predominantly Indian. Tyler Oliveira did a piece on this where these were communities that were once either European or white or American, however you want to, describe it. We could talk about ethnicity or we could talk about nationality, but the point is they weren't solely Indian, and then they've basically been taken over by solely Indians. And what people are really downplaying about this pattern is that it's creating division, and it's making tribalism take prominence in society. Because if you just think about this logically, if you're a young student, or you're a young man or woman who's attempting to enter into the marketplace or attempting to enter into the work environment, and you go to apply for a job, and the person that's analyzing your resume or analyzing your profile, if that person is Indian, unfortunately, what's happening in the, I would say 2010s and beyond is that they will not give you that opportunity. They may not even interview. They will just simply pass on your profile. But if the same level of discrimination was being perpetuated by a European or a white person, everyone would be up in arms. Everyone would be aggravated. Everybody would be taken to the streets in hopes of seeking some sort of justice for the discrimination. There would be protests, etc. The point I'm making is whenever discrimination happens on a mass scale with a, let's say a white person or a white community is discriminating against a minority, and it becomes to the point where it's overt and it's significant, everyone takes issue with it and everyone wants to call it out. But yet when we see this happening with Indians where they're exclusively hiring their own race, like for instance, in Canada, if you go to a lot of Tim Hortons, those Tim Hortons used to be diverse. There used to be Filipino, you would have white, you'd have Asian, you'd have black. It was a job that people who were usually living in close proximity to the restaurant or the coffee shop more specifically, they would take those jobs as a first job or a job while they're in university. And it was a great way for people to basically socialize, potentially meet some friends, potentially meet a girlfriend, save up some money for university, for fun on the weekends, go to the movies, go out for dinner. Now, time and time again, people are reporting, and you can see with your own eyes, that these same companies are just solely Indian, and they're using something called the Lima, which is, in some sense, you could sort of view it as the equivalent of the H-1B, or the temporary foreign worker. The temporary foreign worker would be considered the equivalent of the H-1B. But we have Lima, which is labor impact assessment, which you submit to the government, which represents whether or not you were unable to find somebody in the area that could fulfill the role. And so it's a tool to justify seeking out foreign labor. I know I basically butchered that explanation to some degree, but in short, it's just a way to assess whether or not it's justified to hire overseas. And forgive me, guys, if I'm coming across as tired. I just finished a workout, but I wanted to respond to this news as quickly as I could. But yeah, guys, I mean, I don't know. It just bothers me how there's an immense amount of hypocrisy in this new era, in the new world order. I mean, it's just sad to think that in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, to some degree, there was more of a national identity in Australia and Canada and America. I myself am born in Canada, and man, I just remember how much more unified society was before mass immigration, tribalism, and like I said, this sort of culture where companies are actively hiring people who have an affinity towards their tribe over the people who they grew up around or the nation they grew up in. There's this clear disdain that a lot of these people have towards Europeans and towards white people. And I would even say by extension, people born in America who aren't, Indian. And it's like, it's fascinating because there was a point in time where if I was born in Canada, but people who came to Canada, they wanted to assimilate. They didn't want to live in a parallel ethnic society. They didn't want to be tribal. They wanted to join the national Canadian identity. I know people will say, well, you're talking about Canada, you're not talking about America in this rant equally as much. But I'm trying to emphasize that whether it's a Tim Hortons in Canada or it's a Xbox in America or a Microsoft in America, or whether it's Australia, because if you didn't know, there have been people complaining in Australia about nurses and nurses who are not getting hired because Indians are getting in management positions and they're only hiring under other Indians, and they don't want to hire nurses who are not of Indian descent. And so this tribal behavior, I would argue, it highlights more of the issue than just focusing on America alone, because it doesn't matter if it's America, it doesn't matter if it's Australia, it doesn't matter if it's Canada. I'm just calling a spade a spade. Just like I'll call out negative aspects of Black culture, I'll call out negative aspects of European culture, I'll call out negative aspects of any race or culture, just like I'm calling out these negative aspects of Indian culture. this tribal exclusionary behavior, it's degrading the social fabric of society. It's tearing the fibers that hold together society, because now people are further and further incentivized to stay within their own group. And if we were living in a homogenous society, if everyone would be unified in a sense, if they were sort of clinging to this mindset, right? Like a nationalist, socialist mindset, provided that it was homogenous and there was this group identity. But because in these first world nations now, they are diverse, there has to be some sort of unification. And I would argue you could still cling to the national identity. And ideally, it should be the religion of the nation, the religion that was dominant in the nation. And in America, for quite some time, about 70% of Americans were Christian for quite a while. And so America has a Christian European culture. Canada had a Christian European culture. Australia had a Christian European culture. That's what should take prominence. And even if you're not European, and even if you're not Christian, you should still respect and attempt to assimilate to the core culture. But, it's just disappointing, guys. I mean, I know this rant seems like it's all over the place, but, what I may do at the end of this video is I may insert a clip that summarizes my point. And it's a clip of a man who's a nurse, and he and his coworkers are facing discrimination because they're not Indian. And he himself isn't, European. He's an Asian man, but he still is facing that discrimination. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because a lot of people, a lot of content on YouTube gets suppressed if they believe that you're targeting someone who is non-white. But like I said, this is an Asian person complaining about discrimination that they're experiencing from an Indian, from a collective of Indians. And so I hope that, my all over the place rant post-workout makes sense to some degree. But all I'm trying to say is this pattern we're seeing where people born in the country get laid off and H-1Bs get hired on, and there's this clear in-group, out-group preference of Indian and non-Indian, and departments are quickly becoming more and more of a monolith, and they're becoming homogenous in some sense, and the native citizens are being pushed out of opportunities. Man, I really, 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 really hope that if you are born in one of these first world countries, you are looking out for your fellow neighbor, and you are loving your fellow neighbor as yourself, and you are helping your fellow neighbor in these hard economic times by lending a helping hand. And if you see this sort of discriminatory behavior that many, many people critique white people for, many, many people claim, oh man, I'm so against racism. Racism is so bad. Oh, I'm anti-racism. But the minute someone who isn't white is being racist, no one wants to say anything. No one wants to speak up. They get silenced. Nothing gets done. Guys, it's just, all I'm saying here is that there's a pattern. Just like, many people will bring up the statistic, 13% committing 50% of the violent crimes. We should be able to have these discussions honestly as a way to identify cultural issues. And our goal in these first world nations should be to improve the standard of living for all of us. And if there's any cultural aspects that are degrading the standard of living, we should call it out and discuss it like adults. Like I said, the aspects of Black culture where 30% are committing 50% of the crimes, we can discuss that without being hateful. We could just say, hey, this is a problem. We should look into it and see if there's a solution. When it comes to this exclusionary, discriminatory, racist behavior that we're clearly seeing from the Indian demographic, it's not about, turning everything into like a war or a battle, but it's more so we need to call this stuff out because we have to be fair and reasonable. We can't pick and choose. We can't be hypocritical. We can't sit here and say, oh, we're only going to call out an instance where a white person is being discriminatory, but then, an Indian person is being discriminatory. No one wants to say anything. Or even worse, people get in the comment section and they're defending racism. It's like, if you want to live in a first world country around different people, different groups, different races, different religions, or even if you don't want to, even if you just are, you shouldn't be excluding and pushing people out of society for your own advancement when in reality, in many of these first world countries, there was a point in time, arguably before mass immigration, where whether you were a minority or you were born in the country, you had equal opportunity and you could genuinely get into jobs without the fear of being replaced. Anyways, guys, this rant could get really long, and I didn't really even get to say everything I wanted to say, but I don't want to draw it out for too long. If you guys found this rant interesting, please like and subscribe. I'll try to stutter less and be a little more organized, but like I said, I just finished a really intense workout and I am exhausted. Oh, and also, guys, by the way, if any of what I'm saying resonates with you or you can relate, like, share your experience in the comment section. I think that instead of, everyone just complaining about these situations, I think people need to sort of express how how this has impacted them. And I hope that people who haven't experienced this yet personally can at least have the knowledge now as to how bad this is truly getting, because there are people who are very naive, they're disconnected, they don't think that this replacement is happening. And if you share your experience in the comment section, people will at least be able to see, or at least be able to read, to what extent this is happening. Because I think a lot of times there's people who live in, who are fortunate where they haven't personally experienced this exclusionary behavior, and they think that they're untouchable and it'll never happen to them. But the layoffs might be coming for them. The replacement might be coming for them. Their manager might get shifted to someone who's from a foreign nation. Like for instance, in this case, we're talking about Indians, and that Indian might find an excuse to fire you and replace you with another Indian, because that does happen. And I think people need to be a little less naive about this. So anyways, guys, drop a like, drop a comment if you enjoyed the rant, subscribe, and peace.
There's a loophole. There are pockets of rural places where there is a loophole, and Indians are coming in by the droves. And the plan is to turn all these rural areas into Labour electing counties, and that's how Labour will get re-elected. He's a complete seller. He doesn't care about Australians. He just cares about his party. So and I wanted to share something that was personal. And I used to work for Western Sydney Local Health District. I was an RN for 12 years, 11 and a half if you want to be exact. I was a senior RN, and from the moment that I began work, I slowly saw Indians come in and let me be truthful, not all of them were bad. A handful were really good people, so I'm not dissing all of them. I'm just saying most of them, and what they do is, I call it Indian climbing. So when they come in, they're very, very nice to you, polite, and I even helped some of them. Some of them didn't have cars, so I would often drop them off to the station so that they could get home. I would often, if I did an overtime, I had extra money, I would often buy them food and feed them, And you know what they did? They slowly gain power, and they bully and they gang up on the local people, the Australians, the people that have been here before them. You know what they did? One guy, I pulled him up. It was a Nepalese guy. I pulled him up. I said, "You can't eat the patient's food. That's not for you. That's against the code of conduct." You know what he did? He got his group of Indians and people. He went when I was on break. He went into the car park and slashed both my tires. This is a stuff. People say you're not doing well, blame an immigrant. It's not true. These people are scum. These people are the scum. They're conniving. They're evil people, and they will do anything. They will do anything to suck up to you. And once they get a position higher than you, that's it. They turn on. They don't even have to get a position higher than you. They get their grounding in where they are, where they no longer need to suck up on you. And boom, they turn on you. And this is happening everywhere, not just nursing, in medicine, everywhere, in trucking, look at Coles, go to your Coles or Woolies. I had a mate that used to work for Harris Farm. He couldn't even get shifts. He was I think, third or fourth generation Czech Australian. His heritage is Czech. He was an Australian, white Australian. They bullied